They always came armed. Their weapons, their weapons typically appeared to be look like white pencils with a certain squarish cross-section. The young adults typically carried weapons that were perhaps 6 inches long. The older adults typically carried weapons that were longer, presumably with greater power. The weapon worked like a microwave laser. The weapon could be adjusted for frequencies appropriate for different elements. If they adjusted it for the frequency of sodium, for example, in the human nerves there are sodium atoms and calcium atoms. And if they adjusted it for sodium and fired it at you, it would make it seem like you were getting an electric shock. Like, you know, depending on the power of the weapon, it would feel like you just touched a high voltage wire of 100,000 volts and was extremely painful. If they set it high enough, they could kill you by just going zappo and you'd be electrocuted. If they had it set low, then it would just give a tingling affair, and you know. They never actually used the sodium setting on me, but I did meet, for example, a CIA guard who said that one day he had been walking with the teacher coming down the steps of the Capitol building. And because their bone structure is slightly different than ours, he wasn't familiar with the way they look when they're walking down steps. And he said they were partway down, and it looked to him like the teacher was going to fall. And so without thinking, he reached out and grabbed her by the elbow to steady her. And he said she almost killed him. She jerked the weapon, set it to the sodium setting, and had him down on his knees saying, "You think we're fools? You think we're idiots? You think I'd come here if I couldn't take care of myself?" And she said, you know, it was all he could do to breathe when she used that weapon on him, and he was absolutely terrified of her. You know, she put him through 5 or 10 minutes of, you know, who's giving the orders and who's taking them, you know, and it was nothing but yes ma'am, no ma'am. And they never did that to me, although in addition to the guard, I met a number of guys they had done that to. If they moved it to the calcium setting, then it was like putting you to sleep or calming you down. So like if you were standing there and they did it to you, you might not be able to move your feet, but you wouldn't actually feel terrified. They didn't use the calcium setting very often. One of the weapons they could set to hypnotize a person. When they used that setting, they typically liked a clean shot at one of your temples. And what it would do is induce the same as if you were hypnotized. They could turn it on instantaneously and turn it off instantaneously. And it was common to have missing time experiences. One day I was walking from my theodolite stand to the weather shack. It happened a large number of times, but on this day in particular. And it was like 19 or 20 steps from the theodolite stand to my weather shack. And I could clearly remember taking step 12. And I could clearly remember finishing step 14. But in between those two steps, almost 20 minutes went by. You know, it used to annoy me greatly until I'd finally gotten to where I could break through that hypnotism by relaxing and letting your mind wander. And what had happened was, it was one of the early days in '65. Range 4 Harry had brought some new arrivals around, and he had stepped out from the alleyway between my weather shack and the supply shed and had a clean shot at my right temple and hypnotized me as I was taking step 13. And then while I stood there, he'd brought out the new arrivals and said, "This is Charlie. See, he's got teeth. Open your mouth, Charlie." Just like you do when you're hypnotized. And said he eats more times than we do, and, you know, giving him the tour. This is what a human is. And then when they all went back in, then he's, you know, really, it took him about 20 minutes to go through his introducing them to a human routine, and released it, and then went on, you know. Because of a number of episodes like that, I used to have a policy of writing the time down when I did things. So I used to have a policy of writing down the time, and before I started walking back to my weather shack, of writing down on my weather report, you know, when I left the theodolite stand, and then writing down on my weather report when I got to my weather shack. And of course it should only be like a minute or two, you see. You know, and just to see if they'd done that to me, and I didn't remember it because they could do it so quickly. I'll say one more thing about the weapons. They had another setting that I know about, the iodine setting. And if they fired you, if they hit you with the iodine setting, especially in the thyroid area, it would affect the iodine in your blood, and it would alter the chemistry of the blood so that your blood would seep through the arteries, and you'd bleed to death in like 2 minutes.